In many of our prior videos, we were using a debug technique where we were calling a method called writeString-to-file, which is actually in our common library. So we have a project called BizTalk function library. It's a simple C# project, and it contains nothing except C#, mostly static methods. And so in that we have common function library where we had written a function or a method called writeString-to-file, and that's how we were doing debug. But this routine is actually not scalable. So if you want to run hundreds or thousands of orchestrations at the same time, what's going to happen here is you're going to end up with file locking on this file because only one program can open the file at the same time. Okay, and we don't want to catch the I/O exceptions and so on here. So this is definitely not a scalable solution. So instead, what we're going to talk about in this video is how to make it more scalable by using an SQL solution. And so I've done a lot of this off of the video and done some testing, but have not completed the test. And so here we have a new routine called debug write SQL trace. And we're going to pass it several parameters. Now these parameters are going to tie to the data in our database table. So here I have open SQL Server Management Studio. And I've created a database here called, custom trace. Okay, and it only has one table in it called DBO trace. And let's do a design on that table. So here you can see what all the fields are. There's a identity column to begin with, which will automatically be set every time we store a new record into that table. We have the date and time, which we'll capture in a stored procedure and automatically store there. And then we have the user fields. So source will typically be the name of the orchestration, but it could also be a web service or a C# routine. And what this will allow you to do is have an integrated debug database where the source can be anything you want. Then we have here a stream ID. Now this is a GUID, and this is an interesting concept, is that suppose you have, for instance, a message come in from your website, and you're going to process that through BizTalk, and it might call 5 orchestrations and 7 different web services. Well, what you need is something that ties or packages all those orchestrations and all those web services together. So what you could use is you could either generate a GUID, a global unique ID, when the message comes in from the website, or you could use the BizTalk message ID or whatever. But somewhere in your system you need to come up with a GUID that you can use to follow a message more or less from beginning to end. Then here we have the orchestration GUID, which would just be the specific orchestration that's running. And then I would probably put the orchestration name here in the source. Then I have the message, and notice it's in text where all the others are varchars. In text can be a very large field, and I think the N means Unicode is allowed. So this will be the bulk of your trace message that you want to debug or write out. And it might include some huge XML columns, and it might also include some user variables. Another alternative, if you design your own trace, is you might want to have an XML message, or actually even an XML column here. But if you ever want to write 2 or 3 messages to the same trace, then it's better to have just an in-text instead of using XML field. Then we have a user key, which might be, this is almost like a promoted field. It might be the PO number, the customer number, the order number, something like that. And it's just a way that you could say, show me all the traces having to do with PO number 7. And you could search the database that way. And then the other thing to consider is putting some indexes on these fields. More than likely you want to index the date time field, and you might want to index the user key. It depends on the size of your system, and you might actually have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of rows in this trace. One of the last places I worked, when every time we dropped a large file through our system, it actually might generate 20